Hey guys, HackerSploit here, back again with another video. Welcome back to the Red Team series. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to perform pivoting and how to gain persistence with Armitage. Now, both of these topics have been heavily requested, especially with the use of Armitage, and it's easy to see why. Now, before we actually get started, I just want to let you in on the environment that I've been setting up, or the virtual network, or my home lab rather, and in specific my virtualization server that I've been talking about on Twitter for quite a while. And the reason I set it up, as I've mentioned before, is to obviously create an environment that replicates a company network or an organization network. So again, I've set it up on Proxmox here, and this is my VM server. Let me just drag that right over here. So I currently have a Windows 7 VM running up, and I'm currently setting up firewalls and stuff like that just to test. For the purpose of making a more realistic type of series for red teaming. But in any case, I'm in the process of setting it up, and I'll be making a video on how you can set up your own virtualization server, for practicing pen testing, red teaming, whatever the case. You could also have real world uses for it if you are a developer. So I'll be making a video on that later on, probably the beginning of next week. So without further ado, let's actually get started. So our scenario here, our pen test or red team scenario, whatever you want to call it, is very, very simple. We have successfully been able to exploit a computer in an organization network. And of course, this was done through a phishing attack, using an Excel payload. And the first thing we're going to need to do is set up the listener, right? So that we can start sending and receiving commands to that target and get a interpreter session running on it. So we've successfully got the payload onto that target, and we are going to use pivoting to now, of course, access internal networks and computers that we cannot access from the outside. All right, so let me explain what pivoting. All right, so if this is your first time hearing pivoting, or you don't know what it is, let me just explain it really quickly. So pivoting is a technique that is used by Metasploit to route traffic from a compromised system on a network to networks and hosts that are not accessible to an attacker or a pen tester. And these may be networks like internal networks, and the targets that you may be targeting are things like administrative computers, mail servers, backup servers, etc. Anything of potential value that you now need to get access to. And your primary way of getting access to these resources or assets within these internal networks is the computer you have just exploited, or that you currently have access on. All right, so that is essentially what pivoting is. Now later on, I'll be showing you persistence in this video and how to set that up so that you have recurring access to that particular system and to any other hosts that you are able to pivot onto, or you are able to get access to using pivoting. All right, so let's get started. So I've already sent the payload to the target, which is the Windows 7 operating system. And I'm going to set up the listener in Armitage. So I'm going to go into listeners, and I want to set a reverse listener here. And we are going to listen on port 1234, and it is a Meterpreter shell. So I'm going to hit start listener, and it's going to start the listener. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run the payload. We're going to hit run as administrator here. And there we are. And that should send the stage successfully. There we are. So the Meterpreter session is opened, and we have that on session 1. That's very important. Keep that in mind, because Metasploit does handle various connections to targets or Meterpreter sessions in sessions themselves, right? So now that we have the payload executed, we're ready to begin. So you can see that by default, Armitage, let me just zoom in here so we can get a better idea of how this is going to be displayed. So by default, Armitage gives us the host, the operating system it's running. So if we hover over it, it might not be extremely accurate, but we can see in this case it's running Windows 7 Service Pack 1. All right, so if we right click on it, we have a Meterpreter session, which means we can interact with it through a Meterpreter shell. So if I go into the Meterpreter shell and type in sysinfo, for example, we can see that we get information from it, and we know we are currently live on the target, right? So we'll close that Meterpreter session as we don't need it right now. The first thing we need to do during any pivot is we need to add a route to the particular network, right? And if I go into the Meterpreter shell one more time and we type in an important command that is really important to gaining an understanding of the network that this particular computer is connected to, and its scale is by typing in ipconfig, right? And through ipconfig, by taking a look at the internet or the interfaces that it currently uses, we can see that if we go to the actual hardware Ethernet network interface card here, you can see that its current IP is 192.168.1.105. The IPv4 net mask, which is very important, it gives us an understanding as to the scale of the network we're dealing with. Remember, the larger the net mask, the larger the network. In this case, we can see this is a medium-sized network, which means we can add the route now. And of course, the gateway can be established by taking a look at the IPv4 address here. And from that you can get an understanding of the range of the IP addresses that can be assigned. Right now, we still don't have an idea as to whether this network is using DHCP or it is all IP addresses are assigned to computers manually. But in any case, we can still add the route, and this will allow us then to perform pivoting onto computers and computers on private networks within the company's network. So to add the route, we're going to type in route add, and we can now type in the gateway, so 1.1, and after this we can type in the subnet mask. However, if you already know the range of the computers, that subnet mask roughly translates, or approximately translates, to 24. That's the range of IPs here, and the range of the entire network. And then after this we type in the session number, which is session 1. So again, that can be viewed by typing in sessions, and you can see we have one session right over here. So we're going to type in route add, and again, you can use the subnet mask if you want, so 255.255.255.0, but in my case I'll simply be using 24 just to keep things really simple. And the session is session 1, and hit enter, and as you can see, the route is added. All right, so what we can do now is we can perform a simple nmap scan, and we're going to perform OS detection, and we are going to we're going to supply a range. So let's say 105, and we'll supply a range of 105 to, let's say, 108. All right, and of course I'm doing this purposely so we don't waste any more time. And these two IP addresses between 105 and 108 contain our target Linux server. So I'll just hit enter and hit OK, so we can actually get the results. So it's going to start the nmap scan. We'll give that a few seconds. I'll wait for this to complete, and I'll get back to you as soon as that's done. Alright, so you can see that the scan is complete, and it gives us a bit of an option here to run attacks on those targets. So immediately you can see that we get these green arrows that link these computers or hosts together, and that means that we can pivot onto this system from our target or our exploited system on the network, which is great. And if you go back to the definition of pivoting, we are essentially routing the traffic from the compromised system to hosts on internal networks that are not accessible to us. So this is what we're going to be using to then pivot onto other hosts, right? Which is really great, which means we can chain the process and then, pivot from one host onto the other and get full access to the network. Now, in our particular case, I'm not going to be using this target. I have that set up for another video. So I'll get rid of this host since we're only targeting the IP 192.168.1.107, which is a Linux server that has various services. As you can see, we performed the nmap scan, and we're able to deduce that we have quite a few services running on them, and this I have set up to be a mail server. So we can right click on it, or we can go to attacks and go to find attacks and make sure that that host is highlighted, and we're going to let it query for potential exploits on the target. So we're going to wait for this to complete. Alright, so you can see that our attack analysis is complete, or rather our vulnerability analysis against the various exploits that that exist within the Metasploit database. So we'll hit OK, and now if we right click on the target, you can see we have the attack options here, and through all the services that we have running, we have potential exploits. They may not all work. So let's try FTP, for example, and right over here I installed the VS FTPD 2.3.4 or version 2.3.4, which is known to have a backdoor, and that will give us a Meterpreter session, and if we just click on it, or rather a shell, we then have to upgrade it to a Meterpreter session. So I can click on that right now, and that is going to use that particular exploit. I'll set the L port to 4444, and I'm going to hit launch. All right, and we'll wait for that to launch, give it a few seconds, and we can close this nmap session right over here. For some reason it doesn't want to close. There we are. All right, and the exploit begins, and there we are. We're able to get a shell on it. So if we right click right over here, you can see that it is now compromised, and you get this little lightning around the target, and the arrow here that signifies pivoting is now highlighted in green, which means the pivoting is successful. And if we add other hosts, we can now use this Linux server to then attack other hosts on the network. So if we right click, you can see we have a shell, and we can interact with that, and what is recommended is that we upgrade it to a Meterpreter shell, which is pretty cool. So that is in essence a very basic form of pivoting through a network. And of course I'll be expanding the network and creating various subnets and private networks that I'll be showing you how to pivot into. Right, so again, this is very basic, and now let's move on to persistence, right, which is essentially maintaining access onto all of these systems or onto one system on the network, so we don't have to perform our phishing campaign again, right? So that's very important, especially if you're running this on an organization. You want to maintain access, especially if your pen test or your red team exercise is going to be lasting more than a day, you know, so weeks or months, right? So it's very important. So now that we've established our route and we've successfully been able to pivot onto a Linux server here, let's try and maintain a level of persistence on our Windows system right over here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what persistence is. Persistence is essentially maintaining access onto a system. All right, pretty simple, right? Now, there are tons of ways that we can do this. However, Metasploit and Meterpreter rather, or a Meterpreter shell allows us to do this very simply, right? So if we just take a look at the Meterpreter session that we have running right over here, and if we list the files, you can see that our payload is on the desktop, right? And that's something that we want to get rid of, especially if you're performing a pen test. We want to get rid of our initial MSF Venom payload here. Now, I'm just gonna clear this, but before we do that, let me just close this session. Before we do that, we need to get admin privileges on this system, and we can do that by going into payload. We can go into Windows, and we are looking for bypass user access control here, and then we can try and get the system. However, I know on this system that we were successfully able to get admin privileges on it. So I believe that's in post in any case, yeah, because that is these are still exploits. So let me just go back here into post, and we want to go into Windows, and we want to go and look into escalate, and we have get system right over here. Or we can also take a look at bypass user access control, bypass UAC. There we are. So that's local, so we can run it on the target, and you can do that by dragging it onto your target and just leaving it right over there. And we want to hit launch. All right, so we'll launch it, and it's going to run as a background job, and the exploit aborted due to a failure. And that is because we already have admin privileges, right? Which is great. So now if we right click on it and we get another Meterpreter shell here, we can see that we can still interact with the system and, you know, get user ID. We're currently as the admin user, which is great. All right, so now if we take a look at the processes we have running on the system, you can see that right over here, right at the top, we have the payload.exe running as a process, which is incredibly stupid as an attacker or a pen tester to have this out in the open. And for that particular case, it is recommended that you migrate it into another service, or another system process rather. And one of the common ones that is recommended you migrate it into is the explorer.exe, which is the actual Explorer on Windows. So to do this, we simply type in migrate, and we get the process ID we want to migrate into, and that is sorted out right at the top here into process ID and PPID. So we want to look at the process ID. So if we want to migrate into the process ID of 1288, we can say, for example, migrate 1288, and that should migrate into the explorer.exe, and I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to migrate from 176 to the process ID of 1288. All right, now that we were successfully able to migrate the process into the Explorer, we now need to set up persistence, which means maintaining access whenever the computer is turned off or restarted, we should automatically get a reverse shell using Meterpreter or a Meterpreter reverse shell, right? So to do this, again, we have an awesome utility that comes with Metasploit, and that is the persistence, the persistence module. And we can run this by typing in run persistence within the Meterpreter shell, and let's run the H command for the help options. I'll just show you the commands that you can use to set up the persistence, right? So if I want to run persistence on a particular target, and I first need to make sure I have admin privileges. That's the most important thing first. The second thing is I can essentially set this up by typing in run persistence, right? So, and of course the reason I'm showing you the commands, because you can also do it right from here. You can, I believe it does give you the persistence module. So there we are, persist. So it does give you the option to do that as well, but I'm going to be showing you how to do it manually. We type in the X command, which means we want this module, or we want the payload to run or execute every time the computer is restarted on startup, right? So not on logon, but on startup. We now have the interval, so every time it's going to check for a connection or connect back, and I'm going to set that to 10 seconds. The port I want it to connect to is a port 5555, and the IP is going to be my IP 192.168.1.106 here, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, and it's going to run the persistence module. We'll give that a few seconds to give us the output here. All right, so as you can see, it was successful, but we get a warning telling us that the Meterpreter scripts are deprecated, and that's fine. You can now use a new module called the post-exploitation module for Windows, and that is the persistence exe module, which I'll again be making future videos on as I set up my network. And as you can see, the script is written to the app data folder under this little script. It's a VBS script, and the startup, of course, is going to be written into the registry. All right, so with that being said, it was successfully done, and now we can reboot the system, and we should get the reverse connection. So I'm going to type in reboot, and I'll wait for that to complete. All right, so as you can see, directly after rebooting, we were able to get another shell right over here, and through the port we specified 5555, and that was successful. And of course you can do that by always setting up a new listener with that particular port number, and it should connect to the host immediately. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this particular video. I've covered basic pivoting and persistence with Armitage, and of course that directly means with Metasploit, and hopefully this made sense to you. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comment section, on my social networks, or at the forum at hackersploit.org, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video.